Now, Mr. Walt Disney is a real person, and he had a dark side to him. He was born in 1901 in Chicago, but he spent most of his life in Kansas City, Missouri. It's known that Walt Disney had a difficult upbringing with a strict and potentially abusive father. Now, this part is giving me some Gypsy Rose Blanchard energy because his birth certificate actually was pretty suspicious because it listed him to being 10 years older than he thought he was. I guess it's kind of the opposite of Gypsy Rose Blanchard, but same kind of energy. This caused Walt Disney to have tension with his parents. He kind of felt like he didn't belong. Something was wrong there, and actually one of his movies, Peter Pan, was inspired by that. We've learned a little bit more about Walt Disney since his passing, and his brother sharing horrific stories about their father, like beating at them. And then one day, actually, Walt Disney stood up to his father. His father broke down and said he would never do it again. So that's a lot for these boys to go through.
Often being taken to the woodshed and abused by his father. Walt's brother Roy would often boast about how he encouraged Walt to stand up to their father and refuse to take a beating. In Walt's doing so, Roy claims their father broke down and cried, vowing to never beat them again. Disney shows many signs of being an child that never received treatment or therapy.
Now, Walt started off his career as an animator, which makes sense, and he ended up marrying a woman that he thought he loved. But there are reports that once his wife became pregnant, 8 years into their marriage, he had a full breakdown. According to reports, Walt Disney developed a drinking habit and smoked 60 cigarettes a day. I feel like he probably sounded like Big Ange by the time that he passed away, which rest in peace to Big Ange. We love her, and I miss her raspy voice. But Walt had more than just addiction issues. He suffered from nervous breakdowns and compulsively washed his hands every hour. So he definitely had some OCD tendencies, which I feel like we can all kind of relate to. Like, I'm very OCD about cleaning. I have to have everything clean. Sometimes it is a problem, but you know what? I mean, it's a good problem to have. Washing his hands, though, probably to the point when they're raw, not a vibe. I couldn't do it. Now, Walt established his own animation company. He had a team below him, but in 1941, there were some problems. His workers were not happy with their wages, and they actually went on strike against him. Now, Walt Disney did not give in to his team very easily. He did not just, give them more money. So they kind of did things to taunt him, and I think it kind of, started the culture of this perversive attitude at Disney. For example, on his 35th birthday, the animators threw him a party where they screened an explicit cartoon featuring Mickey and Minnie. And maybe some people would think that's funny, watching Mickey and Minnie. Ew, actually, who would? I'm sure there are people that get off at I'm sure that exists somewhere just nowadays. But back then, in the 40s, they created this kind of as a way to say F you to him and the brand he's built. Now, Walt Disney did not appreciate this animation. He actually laughed a little bit. People thought it was cool. And then he asked who created this. 2 people stepped forward and he immediately fired them and just instructed everyone to destroy any record of this tape. He did not want this out there. He was furious, so not a great little surprise party by his employees. It's reported that those 2 employees walked out of that building in silence. So there's definitely some type of environment of fear, especially of the big boss. But it seems like he's got a lot on his plate. Actually, there was a report that he had accidentally killed his mother, which sounds very dramatic. But unfortunately, it's kind of what happened. I mean, again, it's completely an accident. Once Walt Disney started making some money, he bought his parents a nice house, which is a great thing to do. Congratulations. But when the furnace broke, he sent some of his employees to go and fix it, and they were inexperienced workers, which caused a gas leak and led to his mother's death. I wonder what he did to those employees. If the 2 employees were fired on the spot for creating that animation, I feel like those employees got something much, much worse. But through his early animations, he was pretty provocative. I mean, he was born in 1901, which is not an excuse, but it explains maybe why he's so nasty, mean to racism thing. I'm trying to, speak along YouTube's guidelines. Let's just say it. I mean, he's got some racist and anti-Semitic stuff out there. So I don't know why he's going after the black people and the Jewish people, but he's gone after everyone. And we've got to talk a little bit about this because he's the man who really fueled this cartoon. Here's a clip I found of a few clips of Mr. Walt Disney talking about some things he believes in, which just, I think, speaks volumes.
Disney was an anti-Semitic piece of
When I was a boy in Missouri, I practically lived outdoors. I find I don't make it quite as often now, but like millions of others, I like to enjoy it when I can.
He was as bigoted a person as I've ever encountered, especially in a position of power. He made no bones about not liking this or that type of people. He especially hated, oh God, he didn't like Jews, especially New York ones.
So this man grew up with this mentality, got a lot of power, and he was not shy about it. Actually, at one point, Disney associated with the Motion Picture Alliance, which was seen as an anti-Semitic group. The Song of South was also released without approval from the National Association for Advancement of Colored People. I don't know if they still use that type of phrasing. That's what the reporting is saying. But nonetheless, Disney was super reckless with who they partnered with and what they released. It's actually incredible that it's so known in the industry that Disney was against these type of people that this one woman who was part Jewish was fearful going into the studio and working with them because, I mean, I guess she's assuming that they would know this and they don't approve of her kind, which sounds so, I just can't even fathom that happening, but it still happens today. So very much a problem, but back then just everyone, knew about it and didn't try to address it.
Joan Scott had been aware of Disney's anti-Semitic reputation when she arrived at the studio. Being part Jewish, it made her feel uncomfortable.
We were on our way to lunch at the commissary, and Disney's right-hand man came out the door and said, "Wait a minute." And he said, "Joan, I have a question from Walt. And he just wants to know what your background is." And I knew, I don't know if it's instinctively just common sense, that he didn't want to know if I was English or French. So I said, "I'm really American hash. I'm some English, some Czech, some German, and I'm an eighth Jewish." And you could see this man's face just change expression.
So literally this man heard that she was an eighth, and he just had a reaction. He could not handle it. She wasn't good enough, I guess, to work with them, which I think is so sick and just close-minded, and I don't know, it just doesn't really make sense to me. We're all essentially human beings. The belief system is kind of separate from that entity, but yeah, clearly you can't reason with this mentality. At one point, Mr. Disney personally hosted Leni Riefenstahl, a propagandist, at his studio. She later said it was gratifying to learn how thoroughly proper Americans distance themselves from the smear campaigns of the Jews. So really, this man is ruthless, and I feel back then, if there is social media and a lot of people learning this constantly, I was listening to a podcast today that was explaining how back then people cared more about the economy than they did social issues, and I was thinking to myself, I think it's the communication that we have now. You can learn about these things and learn to care. And maybe back then they weren't talking. I mean, I'm sure nobody wanted to post all these stories about Walt Disney in the newspaper. So really, people had no idea how nasty he was behind the scenes. And the people who did, they're not going to talk about it because they don't want to get blackballed.
Whoever was hiring, I forget, hired this very dark. I mean, he was blue, black Hindu, very dark. And so, Walt.
It's also incredible to hear these people talk about how he was so dark, this man's saying he's evil, but this is the Disney guy, the guy that created this, the happiest place on earth.
Walking along the hallway up to his room and must have made a take you can't believe it. When he saw it, God, he did a take. And went up to his office, I guess, and he said, what's that Negro doing around here? "Oh, no, well, he's not a Negro. He's a Hindu." So he said, "Well, he's pretty dark. Get rid of him."
Okay, I'm just gasp. I mean, clearly this man is super ignorant. I can't believe he's was a world power back then with the amount of influence he had.